Welcome to the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare, the podcast for busy healthcare leaders who are ready to get out of survival mode so they can focus on what matters most. This is where the burnout stops and the real talk starts. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Carter, and each week I sit down with healthcare innovators who get it. We will unpack the chaos, laugh through the hard stuff, and get you at least 2 practical tips you can use at work right away. If you're ready to clear the chaos and lead with impact, you've come to the right place. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare, the podcast for busy healthcare leaders who are ready to clear the chaos and lead with impact. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Carter, and today we are talking about a skill that most leaders are expected to have, but very few have actually been taught. And that's how to speak in front of groups in a way that people actually listen, understand, and act. And this is for all healthcare leaders, whether you're a brand new leader and you're giving your first board report, or if you've been a leader for decades. As a leader, we all have the responsibility to share important messaging with our teams. And because it's not something we typically learn in our leadership development, I thought today's expert would be really helpful to give us both confidence and clarity in that messaging. So today I am joined by none other than Eva Rose Daniel. She is the founder of The Speak Shop, which is a company that helps CEOs, professional speakers, and teams develop and deliver compelling speeches. She's been in the communication industry for 20 years. And she also lives in the Nashville area with her husband, her 4 kids, and a crazy dog. I actually found Eva through LinkedIn. I've been following her content for a couple of years, and I ended up joining her Speak School as a founding member. And it has completely changed how I show up in my keynotes and my workshops. So welcome to the show, Eva.
Thank you so much for having me, Megan. This is so fun.
Love it. Love it. So let's start here. I usually ask my guests what their most chaotic moment in leadership is, but I want to specify around speaking. So if you could share with the audience, maybe what's one moment where you either completely bombed or maybe struggled while speaking, and what did that teach you?
Only one? Okay. Well, one I had was last summer. I was invited to speak to a group of women leaders, and a miss that I had was I didn't get enough clarity on the front end of who all was going to be in the audience. And so since I was women leaders and they'd brainstormed some topics, I had prepared a lot of the content being a little bit more women centric. I even had some really funny humor, almost like a minute or 2 of stand up. I arrive in the room and I realize over 25% of the attendees are not women. Some of my content is not going to work. And then on top of it, this is Atlanta. It's July. It's very, very hot. And my outfit choice did not match the weather. I was way overdressed, so I was very overheated. And as a result of being overheated, I kept kind of flushing as I was presenting. And it was not my best. It was not my best performance, but it did teach me a couple of things. I always like to evaluate my own speaking. And one is just always making sure you're really clear who the audience is, what they already know about your topic, what they need to know about your topic, getting a little bit better scope there, and then wear a breathable outfit if you're ever speaking somewhere that's a lot warmer than your climate at home. And so that was definitely one that I had a little bit more recently that didn't go quite as planned.
I love that. Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that story. And that is so real. Every speaking event that I go to, I learn something new because, there are wins and there are struggles. You get both. And I love that you take the time to evaluate that. So thank you for sharing that wisdom.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your past. So maybe give us just the short version, but how did you become an expert in helping people speak with confidence and clarity?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I started with a love of radio. So I was a news anchor for a couple of years of college, and the first 15 years of my career, I was in the radio, podcasting, YouTube, all of this kind of things that we're doing today. I absolutely loved it. And then along the way, I saw an opportunity to be a speechwriter for Dave Ramsey. He's a financial expert. He has a daily talk show, helps people get out of debt, save for the future. And so that's what initially brought me to the Nashville area to write for Dave and his team of speakers. And then 4 years ago, launched my own company, which you did such a great introduction of there. So I've been in this industry a really long time. I joke all the time that I think that my parents are amazed. I've made a career talking about talking because I was definitely always that kid who had a lot of things to say. One time, one of my mom's friends told her that I could talk the legs off a cast iron pot. I had no idea what that meant. I could tell it was an insult. But so I actually feel vindicated now as an adult that I made a 20-year career about it. But I would say communication is something that I've always just been passionate about, interested in. And I love not only working on my own communication skills, but helping other people show up better in rooms, in meetings, on stages. And that's really what I'm really passionate about is I want every single person to step into the room with a confidence that they can give a great presentation, even if it's just, a 2 to 3 minute Monday morning update at their team meeting. Everyone should have the confidence to be able to step in to a room and communicate their ideas.
I love that. I love it. And that euphemism about talking the legs off of a cast iron pot is such a classically Southern.
I know. Doesn't
Well,
that sound like something a Southerner would say? So there you go.
I'm picturing Dolly Parton saying it like in Steel Magnolias. Like
Yeah,
that is
with like a
fabulous.
twang, maybe with a little bit more of a Southern twang than I have because I've moved here from somewhere else. So I don't have the Southern accent, sadly.
I love it. I love it. That's hysterical. Thank you for sharing that. And you do it so well. And your passion as someone who has worked with you and been coached by you, your passion comes through so clearly. So I'm so grateful to hear that you have not only found something that works well for people, but it's aligned with your values, which is huge. So let's pivot a little bit to our healthcare leader audience. Why do you think even a high performing healthcare leader might struggle with public speaking?
Well, I think you actually hit it really well in the introduction. I think what happens a lot of times, and this is true with any profession, and I know with healthcare, a lot of times you rise in your level of leadership in an organization, and now suddenly you're in a position where you're expected to speak in front of others. Maybe it is those team updates or Monday, maybe it's internal, maybe it's external, maybe you're starting to show up at industry events or speak on stages, but you haven't necessarily ever received training on public speaking. Maybe at best you took a class in high school or college, but that class you're drawing on skills that may or may not be applicable to the real world work environment that you find yourself in. So at best, you're trying to draw back on a class that you had 10, 20, 30 years ago that may or may not was helpful if you even had a class at all. And so a lot of times it's just, one reason healthcare leaders struggle is you've never had training and now you're expected to regularly speak. And so that's a really big one that I see. And then a lot of times it's kind of a lot of people can have a mindset that, well, some people are just good at speaking and that's not me, not realizing it's a skill just like any other that has grown and developed. So if you see somebody that you feel they are such a powerful, great communicator, more than likely they've just spent more time than you have developing those skills. They are skills that you can develop. And so a lot of times it is that mindset shift of thinking through of like, okay, you know what? This is a part of my job, whether I like that or not. Some people enjoy public speaking, some people don't. A lot of people kind of fall in between. But if it is a part of your position and your role, and I do believe it should be because it's one of the best ways you can grow your career. But there is this level of humility of just saying, you know what? This might just be an area I need to learn a little bit more about because maybe you just haven't put the focus on that aspect of your career before.
Right. Absolutely. And as you were describing that so beautifully, a thought that I had, when reflecting on my own leadership experience in healthcare, and the audience knows this. I mean, we have to deliver sometimes really gut wrenching, heartbreaking, soul crushing news to our team,
Yeah.
whether it's, a financial blow and we have to make some cuts, or, if we've had a devastating patient safety event, or guess what, the regulatory people are here. It is so rare that we get to give good news as well. And so I think it's even more important in healthcare to learn how to deliver a message in a way that keeps the audience whole and maintains that trust. Because without trust between that leader and that team, patients suffer, the visitors, it's so high stakes. And
Mm.
yet it's all the training I've done, all the board certification, nowhere do I see in the healthcare leader industry people teaching us how to do this well. So I'm so excited that you're here to talk about that. So maybe let's talk about, if I'm struggling with this, give us some examples. What does it actually look like in healthcare if we're struggling to give that message?
Well, and I think that is, you just teed on it a second ago, is that sometimes you're delivering that bad news. And so sometimes when you're even thinking back to your public speaking, you've had bad experiences or the stakes do feel really high. And so sometimes, there's a lot of ways that struggles show up. Sometimes it's with rambling or with filler words or just not having clarity around our thoughts, or maybe we struggle with speaking because our audience isn't very good. Sometimes, sometimes we think about ourselves as a speaker, but I always like to challenge people. How can you be a better audience member when someone else is speaking? Because sometimes we get up to speak and people are scrolling their phone or texting a colleague that's across the meeting room. So, I mean, it can show up in a lot of ways. And you've hit on it a couple times. Nerves can really impact our ability to communicate our ideas well. And so one practical tip that I always like to give people who do struggle with nerves is, I mean, research shows 7 out of 10 people struggle with public speaking anxiety or glossophobia. Now you have a phobia that you can call it. But I also, sometimes that also just stems from the fact if you're not doing something regularly, and for some of us, public speaking is not something that you're doing all of the time. It's feels very high stakes and nervous. If you're speaking every day, it becomes less intimidating. But if you're not doing it as often, it can feel really overwhelming. So a couple of practical tips I always like to say for those who do struggle with nerves. And often we all struggle with nerves. So I always say too, you might not struggle with nerves when you're speaking in front of 10 or 20 people. Put you in front of a conference of 500, suddenly you're going to have nerves again. And so one thing I always encourage people to do is to change your mindset around it. There's some really fascinating research that's done by Ethan Kross at the University of Michigan. He highlights it in his book, Chatter, but it's about negative self-talk. And oftentimes when we are thinking about an experience, we're speaking to ourselves very negatively. I hope I don't get up there and bomb this presentation. I hope I don't stumble over my words. Oh, I hope my boss doesn't think I'm an idiot. And we're thinking in I statements. And so one thing you can do, even leading up to a speaking opportunity, is to reframe those I statements into third person. It's called distanced self-talk. So instead of thinking, I hope I don't make an idiot of myself, you'd reframe that I to using that your first name. Is the type of person who shows up with confidence. Or let's say I have the thought of, oh, I hope I don't mess up my tech again. That's the usual one for me. I always have tech challenges.
Same,
Even as we were getting on, I was like, is my mic working? All the things.
same.
And so, but I would reframe that to say, Eva's the type of person, even with tech challenges, she is good off the cuff. And so starting to reframe how you're thinking about yourself and how you're showing up can be one of those really big things to do. And then since rambling and rabbit trails and just trying to gain our thoughts, while we're going, a really powerful speaking technique is to pause. Give yourself a beat. As you get to the front of the room, you're about ready to present, take a pause. Don't feel that rushing need to start instantly talking before you're even settled into the spot. Just ground yourself in the moment, pause before you open up your mouth to answer your first, the first thing that you're going to say.
I love that. That's so powerful. And when I think about the cost of poor communication or public speaking at the healthcare leadership level, I think about, again, we talked about the risk of trust between the leader and the team, their credibility. But the worst thing that can happen is we're either misaligned in the message. So I've seen examples where CEOs do this really well, and I've seen some that struggle with it. They sort of give this presentation and they throw a lot of information. They don't really pause to check for understanding. It's not two-way dialogue. The meeting's over. And there's always the meeting after the meeting. It's always the hallway conversations that happen, right? We're all discussing amongst ourselves, and people will walk away with 12 different key takeaways or 12 different deliverables. And so, if we were just making widgets and it was routine work, not a big deal. But in the high stakes world of healthcare, we really can't afford. So even something as simple as a team huddle where you're looking at your metrics board or we're rounding with patients and their families, being able to communicate clearly and effectively, especially when we're stressed and overwhelmed, becomes even more important in my mind for these healthcare leaders. So I love that you described that and even gave us some tips for that.
Well, and what you were just sharing there too on that high stakes, that those high stakes moments of communication, a lot of times we don't really think through what poor communication is costing us, our teams, our companies. I sometimes even frame it for teams. If you have a regular, staff meeting where someone is regularly popping up to share an update and they're not a good communicator, not only does it cost, the 10 minutes of time multiplied by however many dozens, hundreds of people and that payroll perspective, but then that follow-up communication. Well, now we need to have a meeting about the meeting, or we need to send some emails to clarify, because maybe if that communicator wasn't clear, now that there has to be multiple meetings to, what they were trying to say was, or the point was. So spending a little bit more intentional time can make a huge difference. And also, I think as individuals, we don't always recognize how communication can be high stakes for our own careers and our own advancements. I mean, if you're listening to this and you feel that you're maybe a little stuck in your career, maybe you're not advancing to the level of leadership that you would have hoped by this point, it could be because of your communication skills. And
Yes.
not just public speaking, it could be your communication skills in emails or in meetings or in lower stakes environment, not necessarily just quote public speaking. But so I always just like to challenge people that, yeah, again, if you're kind of plateaued in your leadership, is it communication related? And it's worth a question at least.
I love that. I love that. So if I'm a listener and I'm recognizing myself in some of this, let's pivot now to the solution. So for the listener's sake, we're going to talk about three different strategies. So we're going to talk about internal versus external communication. We're going to talk about making data actually engaging because Lord knows we talk about
We
data
all need help with that.
blue in the face in healthcare. And then we're going to talk about speaking with confidence even when you don't feel it. So let's start with internal versus external communication. Eva, how should leaders think differently about speaking in internal meetings versus external presentations?
Well, there's several ways. One, with internal, you are working in an environment where your team knows the jargon. They know you. So you've already established that level of ethos, that credibility where they view you as a valuable team member. So you're not having, as a speaker, you're not having to spend as much time establishing, unless you're new to the team, but not as much time establishing like who you are in the context. I am very passionate, as you know, Megan, about storytelling and having big, fun opens, internal updates, especially meetings. We're not needing as much of that. We always want to have some sizzle with a steak, not just the information, but you probably don't need as much. You don't need this huge crescendo, inspirational close at the end of your 3-minute team update. But a couple internal things that I always want to challenge people with is think about, and this is both true internal, external. One of the biggest mistakes people make is procrastination, waiting too long to work on the content, too long to practice the delivery. A lot of times, especially on those internal things, we think, oh, it's just coworkers. I'm going to just show up. Give your audience the respect of practicing your content prior to delivering it. Even if it's just a meeting update, instead of just walking in there and finding the words as you're going, pick a point. Make sure your presentation has one clear point. Just a second ago, you said, that presentation that leaves with 12 points. This is the same on an internal update. Seeing internal or external, every single presentation you give needs to have a clear point that everything else points towards. But one of the great things about internal is you don't have to spend as much time, hopefully, establishing that credibility, that trust, because you already are credible and trustworthy on your team, if nothing else, because of your title, your position. External events, though, I always like to say, one of the biggest differences is being really aware of who your audience is, how much they already know about you, your company, the industry. It's very easy. We all have this curse of knowledge. We know all these things. We assume everybody else does too. If you're speaking externally, you want to be very sensitive of any sort of jargon. Are you making things more complicated? Do people kind of have this base understanding? It's easy to make assumptions. Well, everybody knows this because your team knows this, your company knows this. They probably don't. You probably actually need to dramatically simplify the message you're taking externally out there. And then again, externally, you're going to want to be spending a little bit more time how you're establishing your authority, how you're entering the room, how you're framing your expertise, because people, they're kind of asking, why should I care? What's in this for me? And hopefully internally they're not doing that, but externally, you need to establish more of that credibility with your audience as you're opening your mouth to say things. So there are a lot of similarities in terms of, hey, you need to have a clear point. You need to have structure. You need to have a clear flow for your content. Obviously, from a delivery perspective, we want to show up as our best selves in the way that, we command the room with our language and our body language. But a couple of those key differences are really audience centric, knowing who you're speaking to and what do they already know about your topic? What do they already know about you? So even again, on those team updates, if you're speaking to, people listening to this podcast have various size of companies that they work for. If you're speaking, let's say you're at a little bit larger company and you're speaking to a different team than your own, within the company, you're going to need to establish a little bit more of that credibility, a little bit kind of bringing the audience up to speed with what your team is doing. So again, we're always asking those audience questions because that really affects both the content and our delivery.
Yeah, I love that. And so I want to make it practical too, because it's such great points. So we've got the internal, how we evaluate through the lens of the audience. But if I'm listening and I'm leading a team meeting tomorrow, so let's say it's internal and I know I'm on the agenda and I have to present, what's one thing I could change immediately that would make me more impactful?
There's 3 questions to ask of your audience. What do I want my audience to know? What do I want my audience to feel? What do I want my audience to do? You can replace the word audience with team. What do I want my team to know? What do I want them to feel? What do I want them to do? And just make sure that that's really crystal clear in the content that you create.
Beautiful. And that's such a great example of how practical your tips are, especially in the Speak School. So for anybody who is looking for, just super quick, I'm super busy, I want the most practical rundown, Eva is the best with this. So thank you for that.
Thanks for being a part of it. You're such an active and engaged member. And
Oh,
so I
thanks.
do in the Speak School, I do live coaching, and Megan's always jumping in with sharing things, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. You're a great communicator, which is why you have a podcast.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I appreciate I'll take all the praise I can get. Absolutely. Let's also talk about data because we are data rich in healthcare, understandably so. We are measuring literally thousands of metrics at any given time across the organization. Most of it loses the room. It's just we know it's boring, we know it's dull. And why do you think sometimes we lose the room? And so and how do you turn that data into something people actually care about?
One reason we lose the room is because numbers, especially big numbers, kind of make our brains shut off and our eyes glaze. I love sharing the story. This happened just a couple months ago to me. I picked up my preschooler. I have 4 kids and my youngest is 4. I don't pick him up from preschool a lot because I'm a working mom. I work a lot. But I picked him up from preschool. We were driving home and he looks out the window and he's looking out the window and he goes, "Mommy, I just love you a million much." And it was so cute, because I knew that a million much was the biggest number that my 4-year-old could comprehend.
Oh,
The problem is, though, in our presentations, a lot of people share million much numbers where we don't really know what that means. And there's a fantastic book by Chip Heath and Carla Starr called Making Numbers Count. So for anybody in the healthcare space who regularly communicates numbers, that book is fantastic. One thing they highlight in that book is that overall, our brains can only hold on to 3, like we can count up to about 5. And then after that, it just becomes a lot. And so within that, but sometimes let's face the reality, a lot of times we do need to show graphs, data, charts, trends, all of those things. But I always say that numbers tell stories too. So when you are looking at a slide that you have that maybe does have a lot of numbers, what is one number on that was startling to you, that was surprising to you? How can you pull out one number, or in your presentation, 2 or 3 numbers? So you are still showing, because they do need to see the trend, the bar graphs, all the things. But what is one really interesting thing you can camp out on? Hey, you guys, I really want you to pay attention to what happened in December of 2023, because I think it affects us today. Or, we're looking at, I want you to see what happened on January 17th. Why the spike? Or why did it dip? Or whatever the thing is, pulling out one specific thing. And then how can you make that grounded in something concrete, relatable? Maybe you can create a little bit of a story around it. Maybe you can pull it out. So let's say, even instead of, let's just say you are using big numbers of, 27 million. That's a big number.
right.
So could you relate and say 27 million, or 1 out of every 10 adult Americans? Think of it that way. Relating it to something more small, more graspable, can help kind of translate that number. Or maybe you give a metaphor. So you can maybe even say, hey, think of this as being like a cluttered desk that has 200 files and you're trying to pick out which one you're going to work on today. That's the situation our customers are facing, clients are facing when they look at this. So can you create an analogy, a metaphor? Can you share a story around it? Or can you build up, if nothing else, instead of just, slapping all your data and numbers down, can it all build up to something? So what is the biggest number reveal? So instead of having like the big numbers, little numbers kind of all together, can you restructure your content where it builds up to something, the most interesting point?
Yeah.
Or the reverse way, can you start with a really big number and then distill it down to the 1? So the million much, okay, there's a million much, and then there's a 700,000 much, and there's a this much. But hey, let's look at how this affected one person in our network named Katie. And then can you maybe share a quick story? So again, numbers and data tell story too. So you want to just think through, when you're in that position of, how do I make some of these numbers at least a little bit more relatable, have a little bit more pop, have a little bit more interest? Let's say you are, though, in a situation where you really are showing those slides with graphs, data, charts, numbers. Can you, from a design perspective, highlight in red, yellow, circle something, make it pop out on the slide? So maybe you kind of magnify on just that section again to draw the attention to it. I always remind speakers, you've heard me say this many times, you, not your slide deck, is the presentation. If you wanted people to just see the reports and the data, why are you not just sending it in an email? The reason why you've brought people into the room and that you are getting up in front of them to talk is because you have something to share about it. You have thought leadership about it. You have thoughts about it. You're the one that needs to be presenting. Maybe it is that high stakes, that bad news. They need to hear from you that, authority, that compassion, that empathy, all of those pieces. But reminding yourself that I am the presentation. This slide deck, it is just the content that is along for the ride. And so really, and don't feel like you have to cover every single thing, every single number, because more than likely you are going to be sending it out in an email later. So make sure that when you are presenting, you are pulling the things that only you can give from that. How can you bring those numbers to life? How can you bring that data to life with the knowledge, the expertise, your position that only you can bring?
I love that. I love that so much. And I have two, as you're saying this, I'm just having these thoughts. There are two quick examples I want to give where people did exactly that, where they, is a storytelling distilled it. And one is a hospital CFO at a health system I worked at, was the only hospital CFO I've ever seen do this. But when he would give the finance report, he took the time to learn what the clinical leaders needed to understand. And as he presented the op margin, the P&L statement, he put it in clinical terms that we could understand.
Mm-hmm.
And it did two things. One, it built trust with him because we felt like he deeply cared about us. This man absolutely did. He was a great CFO. But two, it made us better advocates when we needed to justify an additional cost or an additional FTE. It actually helped train the room. And the other example I like to give is, you said the data tells a story. I've seen a lot of hospitals do this. I adopted this when I was a critical care director. Instead of just showing the numbers on how many infections we've given people, whether that's through, we call them CAUTIs and CLAPSIs, central line or catheter infections. Instead of just showing numbers, I actually put patient names and background story on some of them. I personalized it. So we gave I'm just making this up. We gave Mrs. Smith, an 88-year-old female, a central line infection. She happens to be a grandmother of 4. She lives in wherever, and she was here for 32 days. So we knew she was high risk. Here are the steps we missed. Here's why she had the infection. Here's how it impacted her life. That sounds really harsh, but what was interesting is those critical care nurses immediately saw it as a person instead of a number. And I'm not kidding when I tell you they got so passionate about it. We eliminated those infections 2 years in a row, which was almost unheard of. And I really credit that back to the storytelling. It's not just a data. We put a human face to it. So that's another pro tip for the listeners when you're trying to show data to your team. Make it human, because that's what we're in the business of doing.
Make it human. And anytime, exactly what you're saying, Megan, how you did it, anytime you can wrap it in a story.
Yep.
And sometimes we think, some people, especially that are more analytically minded, that feels like a lot of effort. It does feel like work, but it will be worth it for the way that your audience can grab that information. It doesn't have to be this long, detailed. It can be exactly what you just said, just framing it and a little bit more of like the humanity aspect of the numbers.
Love that. Love that. So we've talked about internal versus external and sharing data. Let's also end quickly on speaking with confidence. Now, you already talked about the book Chatter, which is an amazing reference. The third person speaking, pausing, and some of that deep breathing before you go on stage. I want you to share with the audience your love of Lay's potato chips and why.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Oh, that's such a setup. It's one of my favorites. Well, it's wrapped within a story. So 10 minutes before my first shift as a news anchor, this is, over 20 years ago now, I suddenly, had those nerves. I feel like I'm going to throw up, like my stomach's in my throat. I'm completely freaking out.
Yeah.
And this is not like high stakes radio. This is small, like rural town radio, but still I was just, gripped by nerves. So I'm freaking out. And so the general manager of the radio station pulls me in her office and she goes, Eva, I'm going to need you to calm down. And I'm going to share with you this secret that has been used by radio announcers for 100 years. Opera singers use this, performers use this. She reaches in her drawer and it tosses me a bag of yellow Lay's potato chips, like plain potato chips. Totally shook me out of the moment. So if nothing else, it just shook me out of the moment to be like, what? But really, It's true. The salt eats away at the phlegm in your throat, the oil lubricates your throat, and the grease settles your stomach. So I've been sharing this story for years. I live here in the Nashville area, and I've since in the last couple of years had it confirmed by two people that this is a very common thing that performers do before they eat. Is some people even French fries, potato chips. The concept is the same of that salty potato snack. So there
Yeah.
you go. That's just one fun tip before you get speaking. But another confidence booster, I kind of mentioned it a moment ago about making sure you're settled before you open your mouth, but grounding yourself in the
Yeah.
first minute can be such a powerful thing. So what I mean by grounding yourself, you walk to the front of the conference room, the stage, wherever you are, and you plant your feet shoulder width apart, you drop your shoulders, you open up your arms, you make eye contact with someone, you smile, and you say that first line. And
Mm.
for that first minute, just stay in one spot. You might be a speaker who loves to move and have energy. I know I do as well. But physically grounding yourself in that first 30 seconds to a minute can calm your nerves, but it also is more commanding to your room. You look confident, you look in control. Another big one is making good eye contact. A lot of research has been done about eye contact, and it's called the leadership gaze. CEOs consistently make eye contact 60 to 70% of the time, where the rest of us often only make it 30 to 40% of the time. The concept for speaking is this. Not only are you making eye contact, but you are consciously, I'm going to hold one full thought with this person before I shift over to the next person, and I hold that full thought with that person before I'm going over here
Mm.
and sharing a thought. Having better eye contact can really it can help with your own confidence because you feel like and look for the friendly face, start with the friendly face as well. But those things can make a big difference. But a really big one, and I always sound as a speech coach like I'm harping on it, but is practice.
Mm.
Practice your content in front of a real person prior to delivering it in front of a group. I can't tell you how many even professional speakers I have worked with that make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year speaking who aren't in the habit of regularly practicing.
Mm.
Your first time delivering content should not be in front of the audience.
Yeah.
Whether that looks like pulling a couple coworkers, a few days before to say, hey, I'm really nervous about this presentation I'm giving next Thursday. Can I just run it through you?
Yeah.
Minimum running it through your spouse, total bare minimum running it through out loud in front of your mirror.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
ideally, you're going to practice in front of other people for feedback prior to delivering it. This can be especially helpful. Let's just go back to your CFO example you gave a minute ago. He was so good at relating it. Well, let's just say that you are speaking to a team. You're kind of like in that CFO role where you're speaking to a team that's a little bit different aspect of the business, well, maybe pull somebody, one or two people from that team prior to delivering it to the larger team and say, hey, I'm trying to relate this really well to your team. Could I just run it by you to see if you feel like it fits? Because unbeknownst to you, you might be using some jargon or you might be
Yep.
making assumptions on what the audience knows. And so practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes confidence.
Right.
Practice gives you the confidence to go, you know what? Honestly, I delivered this to Megan last week. That was worse and more awkward because there's one person in the conference room. Now this actually feels easy because you already have that first rep out of the way. And
That's a
so
good
to
point.
show up with confidence oftentimes is a reflection, not of just being in that moment and some of those mindset, physical things you can do, which are important for those last minute jitters, but it's the way that you've approached that ahead of
Yeah.
time. So, I mean, one of the greatest things you can do is stop procrastinating.
Yeah.
Don't wait so long to work on the content or the delivery. Or if you're listening, don't wait until you have a presentation to think, oh, I should work on my public speaking skills now. There's something that you can be working on today, far before you even have that presentation on the books.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to be vulnerable with you in the audience. I suffer from procrastination when I feel overwhelmed or intimidated. And so what I've learned having worked with you in the speak school is even before I book an event or even before I'm in front of an audience giving an update, I'll go ahead and prepare and practice. It's helped me a little bit. And I identify as neurospicy. So I've learned that it's kind of my freeze response. My body feels unsafe actually even working on it because I picture myself in the moment. So that's been super helpful. I cannot believe we're already at time. This is already
I know, it has flown.
an incredible
Again, a career talking about talking. I just could go all day.
You can talk the legs off a copper pot, girl. I love it.
I can. Well, you'll love this. Last week, I was giving a 5-hour public speaking workshop to a team in Seattle. And there was a little part of me, I'm like, oh, only 5 hours? It's like, even that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time.
Most people would be relieved if the shorter the better, and you're leaning into it. I love it. I love it. So as we close out, I always like to ask my guests something a little different, because we've talked about a lot of pain points in the struggle, but I like to end on sort of a lighter note. But what is something outside of work that brings you joy or laughter right now?
My kids. I have 4 kids, 4, 7, 12, and 14. There's so much energy. There's so much chaos. I feel like the chaos whispers. There's not whispering. It's like the chaos, like the chaos loudness in my house. But my kids just bring me so much joy. I mean, back to my much 4-year-old. If you ever want some joy in your life, spend some time talking to 4-year-olds, because they just say whatever they think and whatever they feel. And kids are just so fun. My 7-year-old the other day, she goes, I don't think I want to be a parent. And I go, oh, well, why is that? And she's like, because all parents do is just boss kids around all the time. And I thought, oh, that's what I do. I just boss kids around all the time. But my kids bring me a lot of joy, and we're very excited. Summer is always one of the best times of the year. So looking forward to summer.
I love that so much. And I'm so impressed with you, by the way, as a fellow female solopreneur, that you're handling all 4. I have one 16-year-old, and he's great.
That might be harder, though, because they're driving. Is he driving and out and about?
He's doing his own thing, which is lovely. But of course, I'm always worrying about him. And the last time he said something that cute, and he's so sweet. I mean, I adore my son. He's the easiest 16-year-old I could imagine. But when you gave that story about your 4-year-old, it just made my mama heart squeeze a little, because, those days.
And they go so fast. I mean, again, my oldest starts high school next year. And how did that happen?
It's wild.
We do not get the million much comments from the 14-year-old. I'm lucky for a fist pump over here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Eva, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share so much wisdom with us. There's so many practical tips, and audience and listener, I don't want you to panic. Everything that she shared with us will be listed in the show notes. And Eva, if people want to learn more about you, connect with you, or maybe even consider the Speak School, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, so you can go to thespeakshop.com and you can find information about me. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, so I would love to have you connect with me on LinkedIn as well. Eva Rose Daniel on LinkedIn.
And personal stories, what she posts on LinkedIn, you guys, she constantly shares free articles and free frameworks just freely. If you just follow her, that's how I got so hooked on her, because she freely shares her knowledge. So follow her on LinkedIn. It's amazing. And if this episode has helped you, listener, please share it with a colleague who's leading meetings every day, but maybe hasn't been taught how to communicate this way. Eva, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Megan.
Thanks for joining us on the Chaos Whispers of Healthcare. If today's episode resonated with you, please be sure to follow this podcast, rate, and leave a review on your favorite platform. I'm Dr. Megan Carter, and I will be back next week with more real talk, fresh strategies, and guests who are redefining what it means to lead with impact. Want to keep the conversation going? Be sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and download free tools and resources from my website. Both links are in the show notes. Let's heal this broken healthcare system together, one day at a time.